Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Smart Tea podcast, where we talk about the lives of scientists and innovators who shape the world. How are you, Aarati?
I am doing really well, Arpita, and do you want to know why?
I do. You have such a huge smile on your face. I want to know.
Because it is episode 10 of our podcast. That's why. I'm super excited that we got here.
Double digits.
Yes. I read a stat that most podcasts stop after 3 episodes. So this is a huge achievement. This is amazing.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
We're defying all odds.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think what have we been doing this for almost 4 months now?
I know, that's crazy, right? I mean, that's really good track record for me in terms of sticking to things. So I don't know about you, but for me, that's very impressive.
I think it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Yeah. How have you been doing? How's wedding planning and stuff going?
Wedding planning is going. We are, as of today, exactly 1 month out. So all the big things are done, but it somehow seems that there is an infinite amount of small things that keep coming up.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm playing whack-a-mole a little bit, where I cross something off and then just a new thing pops up.
Yeah.
Or what is the Greek story? It's Medusa, right? You chop off one head and then another one grows back. Or no, what is that?
No, that's not Medusa.
It's not Medusa.
Medusa's the woman who
Medusa has
you.
all the serpent.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I know who you're talking about. Oh my god, my Disney knowledge with with Hercules. I remember the scene where he's chopping off
Hercules.
the heads.
It is Hercules.
Yeah.
But I don't remember what the creature was, but where you chop off a head and then two more grow back.
That's a good question. Let me look it up real quick because now I'm curious. The Hydra. That's who you're thinking.
The Hydra. That's what it is. I'm Hercules and wedding planning is the Hydra.
Oh my god, that's an amazing analogy. I just am picturing a Hydra with bridal veils on each head. Yeah.
So funny.
It's just the massive wedding Hydra. Yeah.
In not wedding related news, my exciting news for the week is not exciting at all, but I have been really enjoying it. I'm very obsessed with Chapel Rowan right now, who's an artist.
Oh, I've not heard of
singer.
Okay.
And you probably maybe heard of her songs. Some of her songs went viral as TikTok sounds. But I think she is so wildly talented, and her title track on her album is called Femininomenon. And she just talks about how we need a feminist phenomenon.
Oh, nice.
And I'm just loving it. It's great vibes. It's very pop dance party, a little unhinged in the lyrics, but so here for it.
What's her name again?
Chapel Rowan.
Chapel Rowan.
2 L's.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check it out because I feel on TikTok I hear all of these sounds, but then I never know what song it came from or what movie it came from, and then somewhere along the way, at some point, I'll see the movie scene or I'll see the song, and I'll be like, "That's it. That's the song."
Yeah.
So right. Yeah, I bet that's gonna happen. I'll look her up and I'll be like, "Oh, yes, I know that
You'll
song.
recognize
I love that song." Yeah.
What about you? What's been going on with you, other than being very excited about podcast number 10?
So this last weekend, I was dog sitting for my neighbor, which is actually very pertinent to this episode's theme. But it was just so funny because it was the first time that my dog, Cairo, had another dog living with us. And so I got to kind of see how that went. And it went pretty well for the most part. He kind of just ignored her and she ignored him. So
best case scenario.
Yeah, that was great. I was fine with that. But it was also really funny to just look at the different behaviors that these two dogs have and just kind of see how different dogs and their personalities can be. They're so different. And I just thought it was fascinating because my neighbor's dog is this really cute, canonically cute doodle and has curly hair, white and tan fur, and just looks like a little teddy bear,
So cute.
Yes, and she has been told that she is adorable for her entire life. You can tell she just has that kind of vibe that she's I'm adorable and I know it, whereas my dog Cairo is half German Shepherd and half mutt. We got him from the shelter. He's like so disproportionately long and tall. And he just kind of has this sort of scary look about him, but he's actually the friendliest guy, you know? Um, but like that's just one difference, that they're like so different looking. But then in terms of their behavior, also, like Cairo will eat literally anything you give him he will swallow. But the dog I'm dog sitting, she will not eat anything. It's ridiculous. Like we give her her kibble and she's like, no thank you. And I'm like, okay, but you haven't eaten for like a day. So, and then I called her owner. I was like, what do I do? How do I get her to eat? Because she's like on a hunger strike or something, and I don't want her to starve to death. The owner was like, oh, maybe put some cheese on it, maybe add some of Cairo's kibble to it, and she'll eat it. So I did that, and she ate like a couple mouthfuls, and then she's like, all right, I'm done. And I'm like, you didn't even eat all of it and haven't even eaten for like 24 hours. I'm stressing out so much. Whereas Cairo's like, is she done with that? Can I eat that now? Like,
I was gonna ask that. I was like, did Cairo eat the rest of her food?
He really wanted to, and he is really good at listening to directions, though. So you just tell him no, and he does not. But he was looking at it very longingly, so you know. And then also, like when we want to go outside, like Cairo is excited to go outside, but he stands very still to get his harness on and everything. And then once we go outside, he will go for miles. He will walk. He will run for miles and miles, you know? But this dog, she's like so excited to go outside. She's like jumping around. We have to wrangle her to get her harness on. And then once we get outside, she walks like 100 feet and then she's like, okay, I'm done. And we're like, what? What was all that? So it was just like so funny. It was just like such a different dog. And it kind of got me wondering like how much of that is kind of in their nature, because they are two very different breeds, but how much of that is also just our lifestyle, because my family will just naturally go for really long walks. We love to go hiking. And my neighbors are kind of an older couple, so she might be kind of a homebody, which, you know, I respect that, but it was just...
I respect that too.
Yeah, it just kind of got me wondering, like, how much of it is like their nature and how much of it is like how they've been brought up and what they're learned behavior. And that actually, like, as I was thinking about that, seemed to really flow very nicely with today's episode, actually.
Wow, I love that. Who are we talking about today?
So today we are talking about Dmitri Belyaev, who was a Russian geneticist, and he is most famous for his experiments in domesticating foxes. And I wonder if you had heard about this, because this definitely like rang a bell in my head from undergrad. Some science class that I took in undergrad, the professor definitely talked about this experiment.
I don't think so. I must have slept through that lecture.
Well, to be fair, I don't know if I learned it or if my professor just kind of went off on a tangent and I found that tangent super interesting. So it might have been that. But yeah, he's doing experiments in domesticating foxes because he got really curious of the question as to how dogs got domesticated. Yeah. And this experiment is also interesting because it is still ongoing. It is probably one of the longest biology experiments because it's been going on for over 70 years. So
70 years?
Yeah. So I'm really excited to talk to you about it today. So Dmitri Belyaev is his name. He was born on July 17th, 1917 in Protasovo, Russia. And I should mention here, there's going to be a lot of Russian names. I'm really sorry if I...
You crushed that. That was good.
Yeah, Protasovo, Russia. He had 3 older siblings. His father, Konstantin Pavlovich Belyaev, was a priest, and his family were peasants. They took care of livestock and grew corn, but they also placed a high value on learning and education. But right from the get-go, Dmitri's childhood was very unstable because 1917, the year he was born, was also the year of the Russian Revolution. I don't know if you know much about the Russian Revolution. I am weirdly fascinated by it, actually. I have like a mild obsession with it.
Wow, so random. I don't know very much about it except for bad Bolsheviks, starvation.
Yes.
That's the summary.
Yeah, I like the part a little bit earlier. Like is a
Okay,
weird
okay.
word to use, but like the whole downfall of the Romanov Empire and Anastasia,
Mm-hmm.
Rasputin, like all of that. I'm just like fascinated by that. I always have been. But we'll do a quick history lesson because it is important to the story.
Okay,
So,
good. I need a recap.
yes, quick recap. So before World War One and then throughout the war, there was a lot of civil unrest, especially among the lower classes, because working conditions were horrible, wages were low, and basic needs weren't being met.
Mm-hmm.
And the people started rising up against Tsar Nicholas II. Eventually, he abdicates the throne, which ends a 300-year reign of the Russian monarchy. A provisional government called the Duma took over, but within months they were overthrown by the Bolshevik Party, led by Vladimir Lenin. Lenin founded the Soviet Union, or the USSR, and led the country under his Marxist communist ideals. But in 1924, Lenin died unexpectedly from a stroke, and Joseph Stalin took over. And as we all know, Stalin is this ruthless dictator. And if you oppose him, you're doing so at the risk of your own life.
Okay,
So,
it's all coming back to me now.
yeah. So now, just 7 years after Dmitri is born, Russia is a radically different place than it was. Prior to the revolution, most of the country were Orthodox Christians, but once the Communist Party took over, they forcibly tried to instate atheism throughout the country. And although religion was never made illegal outright, many places of worship were destroyed, believers were harassed, and religious property was confiscated. And Dmitri's family was a target of this as well, because remember, his father was a priest. So
Mm-hmm.
his father was harassed and repeatedly imprisoned, and it got so bad that when Dmitri was 10 years old, he was sent to live with his oldest brother, Nikolai, in Moscow. Nikolai was 18 years older than Dmitri and was already a prominent population geneticist at this time.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So Dmitri practically worshipped Nikolai and followed him around everywhere. Nikolai would take Dmitri to his lab meetings, which Dmitri called the yelling meetings because lab members would loudly discuss and argue over data, which I thought
I
was,
love that. That sounds a little familiar, maybe.
yeah, I thought that was so cute. But he loved it. He loved this. And this is where he was like exposed to science and picked up his interest in genetics. And also, can I just say he's like 10 years old at this point? I'm so impressed that he's like listening to and understanding university level science. That's like crazy to me.
It just feels like that would just be like the grumpiest environment for a 10-year-old. You know,
Yeah.
it's like going with your parent to work. Like I used to have to go to work sometimes with my parents, and it was just like you just like throw a tantrum. You're just like, what am I supposed to do now? Like
Yeah. Like,
it's like not where you want to be.
yeah, what is this? This is not fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's loving it. He loves this, and this is where he picks up his interest in genetics. But in 1928, Nikolai was offered a job in Uzbekistan, so Dmitri was sent to live with his sister Olga. Life was tough for Olga and Dmitri, and despite his interest in biology and science, Dmitri had to enroll in a 7-year vocational program and trained as an electrician so that they could make money to make ends meet.
Can I just say that
Mhm.
everybody in this story has the most Russian names I could possibly think
Yes,
of?
don't they?
Like if you told me like what do you like name the people in this family? I'd be like Olga, Dmitri,
Yeah, exactly.
Nikolai.
Nikolai. There's
Yeah.
like also like I don't mention them all, but there's like 10 Nikolais like throughout Dimitri's life, including his son. His son also is named Nikolai. So eventually.
That's so funny.
But yeah. So he trained as an electrician to make ends meet, but he did desperately want to follow in Nikolai's footsteps. So when he was 17, he tried to apply to Moscow State University, which was the same school that Nikolai had gone to. However, now because of the Stalin regime, Dmitri was denied entry because he was a priest's son. So instead, he attended a trade school called Ivanova State Agriculture Academy, where he could start studying biology.
Why was being a priest's son precluding him from being a university student? Because wasn't Nikolai also a priest's son?
Well, that was 18 years ago when
Oh,
the
before
Tsar was
Stalin.
still,
I see.
yeah. Now Stalin's taken over. There's this whole like thing against religion, and the communists are trying to instate atheism. And so because he was a priest's son, for whatever reason, that meant he couldn't be educated, I guess, in the state university. So
Okay, got it.
both Nikolai and Dmitri were strong supporters of Charles Darwin's theory that differences in species arose from small inherited changes over time, and Gregor Mendel's theory that these inherited traits are passed down through an organism's genes. But this was a really big problem because, in addition to the crackdown on religion, Stalin was also very much against genetics research. He considered genetics to be a tool of the upper class that was used to oppress the lower class. And that was the whole reason for the revolution, right? To empower the lower classes. So genetics kind of, according to him, undermines this because the upper class could kind of use that to say, our genes are better than yours, is his argument. So unfortunately, Stalin became a supporter of a man named Trofim Lysenko, who was doing experimental research in agriculture to improve crop yield. And as you mentioned earlier, this was a really hot button issue because Stalin's government was struggling to feed the Russian people, and there's all these famines that are widespread throughout the country.
I don't know a lot about Russian history, but famine, I know that.
Yes. So Lysenko is claiming that his research could not only drastically increase crop yields during the winter months, but he also claimed that if you planted the wheat seeds under the right conditions, you could transform them into rye or barley.
Is that true?
No, that's not true.
Okay.
That's complete
that
crap.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. But he was promising quick results as opposed to Mendelian genetics, which was much slower. And this was at a time, again, when people are starving. So following Mendelian genetics is not as sexy, quote unquote.
Not as appealing. That makes a lot of sense. This is like early GMOs, basically.
Well, not even, because he's not even saying genetically you can modify them. He's also against genetics. Lysenko's against genetics too. He's just like, if you make the seed cold and then hot again and then twist it around in a different way, then all of a sudden it's going to become rye. And it's like, no, it's not.
Oh, yeah. So this is all garbage.
Yeah, this is all garbage. It's complete garbage.
Okay.
But also Lysenko was from a peasant family, so he hadn't attended a university. He had no science degree. And like Stalin, he had this view that scientists were bourgeois tools of the upper class who were using the idea of genetics to keep the lower class in their place. He gave speeches equating genetics with being anti-Marxist. And all of this made Stalin a really big fan of Lysenko and his work, even though it was pseudoscience at best.
That makes sense, right? It's along with his other ideals of no religion and making sure that everybody is quote unquote equal in a Soviet regime. That makes sense.
Yeah. And it's very appealing to elevate this man who comes from this very peasant background. It's right. Oh, I'm elevating one of you can rise to the ranks,
Right.
So Stalin throws his weight behind Lysenko, and he eventually becomes director of genetics for the Academy of Sciences, which gives him pretty much total power over genetics research being done in Russia. And it starts this trend called Lysenkoism, which was basically a political campaign against geneticists. So no one was allowed to study Mendelian genetics or genetic inheritance in the kind of traditional sense. Geneticists would lose their jobs and get arrested. And in fact, in 1937, Dmitri's older brother, Nikolai, was arrested on a trip back to Moscow, denied a trial, and executed because he dared speak out against Lysenko's ideas.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely a good sense of what was going on under Stalin's rule.
Yeah. Very, very scary. So it's an extremely dangerous time to be studying genetics. But Nikolai's death kind of instilled this fire in Dmitri to fight against Lysenko and avenge his brother. But he was also smart enough not to poke the bear, so to speak.
Yeah.
He knew that if he started yelling about genetics, he'd probably just be jailed and executed too. So he took a sneaky approach instead and started to cloak his genetics research under the guise of animal physiology and behavior studies, both of which Lysenko and Stalin were fine with.
Mm-hmm.
For his dissertation, he framed his studies as experiments to improve the thickness and quality of silver fox fur, which was a very lucrative export for Russia at the time. So they were all for that. They were like, yes, make the fox fur better. We'll get more money. Excellent, excellent job.
Yeah.
And it's definitely has nothing to do with genetics, according to them.
Was it actually about, like crossbreeding and making, selecting
Secretly,
for.
yeah. Secretly, yes. But
So if they didn't believe in genetics or didn't believe that genetics are true at all, there's no way they would have figured out that what he was doing was selecting for desirable traits and breeding based on that, right?
yeah, I don't think so. I think they were just like, oh, you're just doing this based on like,
Got it.
examining the quality of the fur, which we're fine with. And they didn't look much deeper into it than that. For now.
Okay.
For now, they didn't.
I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because if they don't have a framework for thinking about genetics, then they wouldn't have probably picked up on that.
Exactly. So in 1939, Dmitri gets a job at the USSR's Department for Fur and Animal Breeding in Moscow and is assigned to work at a government fur farm. Then, shortly after, World War II breaks out and Dmitri's drafted into the Russian army. He joins the war effort initially as a machine gunner and then quickly rises through the ranks. He earned many medals of valor and decorations for his service. Years later, Dmitri's son wrote that his father didn't like talking about the war and said it was all blood and dirt, although he did attend Victory Day celebrations and stayed in touch with his army friends later in life. After 4 years of fighting on the front lines and sustaining multiple injuries, Dmitri was honorably discharged as a highly decorated war hero, and he returns back to his laboratory at the fur farm. And now he has this reputation for not only being an excellent fox breeder, but also a man that has this outstanding military record. So he knows how to get things done. And those two things combined promotes him to head of the Department of Fur Animal Breeding.
This is just such a random department.
I know.
Fur farm.
Fur animal breeding. But apparently, I was reading these fox pelts could go for thousands of dollars for one pelt, depending on how good it was or how beautiful and luxurious it was. So it's a very lucrative, export for Russia at a time when, again, people are struggling. So the Russian government's all for it.
It is interesting because I feel like even in TV shows in like the 60s, 70s, even up to the 80s, they talk a lot about furs and how they're unethical and like how people are like, oh, you shouldn't have like a fur jacket or whatever. And I feel like that's so much less common, but was definitely a thing for a long time.
Oh,
to,
yeah.
like wear real furs.
Yeah, and I can totally imagine like silver fox fur sounds
that
so
sounds really
exotic,
beautiful.
and
Yeah.
it would definitely, I feel like, be something that you would brag about.
100%. Yeah.
On par with mink or something. I don't know anything about.
I don't know anything either.
But, like it sounds impressive, I feel like.
It sounds cool. Like it sounds luxurious.
Yeah. So now he's the head of this Department of Fur and Animal Breeding, which is a very important position. It's a very important department to Russia. And so this new position made Dmitri a little bit more confident that maybe he could start speaking out against Lysenko's ideas and not be executed.
Because he's like a big deal now.
Yeah, he's an important person. But actually, the war had just made things even worse for geneticists because Russia had been fighting against the Nazis. And probably the biggest thing we all know about the Nazis is that they believed in maintaining the purity of the quote-unquote master race. So Stalin and Lysenko both start pushing this idea that genetics as a whole was evil because if the Nazis believed in genetics, then it must be terrible.
That's not even a crazy leap.
Yeah, I know. Sadly, it's not.
Yeah, it's not a crazy leap.
So in 1948, studying genetics in the USSR was banned completely. Dmitri was furious, and he made a passionate speech about the importance of continuing genetics research, which pissed Lysenko off. Yeah. It also brought Dmitri's work under scrutiny, and people realized that his dissertation thesis, which was entitled The Variation and Inheritance of Silver-Colored Fur in Silver-Backed Foxes, was in fact heavily rooted in Mendelian genetics.
Okay, so they finally like put it
They
together after
finally
that.
put it together. Like, yeah, as you were saying, like, I'm not really sure how they missed that, but
Right.
yeah. So they figured out his thesis was rooted in Mendelian genetics, and he was banned from teaching at the Moscow Fur Institute. Any scientific articles he tried to publish were instantly rejected, and he was removed from his position as head of the department.
So at least he wasn't executed.
Yeah, exactly. At least he wasn't executed.
Just fired, not executed. It could
Yeah.
be worse.
Yeah. So for the next several years, Dmitri kept his head down. He tried to stay on the good side of the communist officials, although behind their backs, he called Stalin a quote unquote bastard and Lysenko a scientific bandit, which I just
What?
love it. Yeah.
Are these all translated from Russian, I assume?
I assume so. Yeah.
I assume so. Like, that's like so funny. Like, I
Oh
feel
my
like when you
God.
think about insults
I
like
would
that,
love to hear it in Russian. Somebody tell me.
yeah, or like
Somebody.
curse words. Like, I
Yes.
want the direct translation. You know, like, it doesn't
Yes.
always translate well if you are directly translating like swear words.
Oh yeah, I'm
That is
sure
so
scientific
funny.
bandit is so much worse in Russian.
Oh, yeah. Can you imagine? It's
Yeah.
probably terrible.
Yeah. So he continues to breed foxes for their fur and continues to frame his research as research in animal physiology. And slowly, again, he starts climbing through the ranks and becomes a lead scientist at the Central Research Laboratory on fur breeding animals in Moscow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, this is a different institution, but this kind of sounds a little bit same but different.
Yeah.
And nobody cared about that.
I guess not. I think because he kind of must have known how to play the game and been
I
like,
see.
you know, oh yeah, I did a bad thing. My bad. I promise I'll never do it again, you know? And they were like, "We believe you because you're so amazing at breeding foxes for their fur. Like you're so good at it. So we believe
Yeah.
you, you know, you're making Russia so much money. Okay, like slap on the wrist, go about your
Okay.
business." So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I was like, that sounds like a little too similar. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna lie.
Yeah. I think he was just too good of a fox breeder for them
Yeah.
to like get rid of completely, it sounds like. But in 1952, he secretly launches one of the most famous experiments in genetics. Dmitri had been breeding silver foxes for some time now, and he had read a lot about breeding and animal domestication. But even though humans had been breeding silver foxes for their fur for a really long time, the foxes were not at all domesticated. They would bite and snarl aggressively as humans approached them, or they would react fearfully and try to hide in a corner. So caretakers at these fox farms had to wear 2-inch thick gloves in case the foxes tried to bite them.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. But here's the question that fascinated Dmitri. He was like, foxes are actually very closely genetically related to dogs. And it's well known that dogs were domesticated a long time ago from wolves, which are very much wild animals, just like the foxes are. So you could imagine if you met a wolf in the wild, it would probably react the same way as the foxes were. They would either try to attack you or they would run away, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the question was, how were humans able to domesticate wild wolves and over time make them into these loyal, loving companion dogs that we have today? And the other question Dmitri had was he had also observed that in addition to their tameness, domestic animals often started exhibiting physical changes. One really big one is that many animals would retain their young baby features even as adults, like floppy ears on a dog or curly tails on a pig.
It's really cute.
I know. Many also developed patches of different colored fur, and these changes seem to arise spontaneously because it's not like humans centuries ago would have selected for these traits.
Right.
Like, for example, if a shepherd wanted a dog to protect its herd of sheep, why would floppy ears be an advantage in that job? They wouldn't have cared
Yeah.
about that. They would have just cared about who's the best protector.
It is a good question because, like, if
Yeah.
like dogs all share a common ancestor in a wolf, there's so many breeds of dogs that were like bred to do specific tasks and for
Yeah.
different reasons, and they all have very different, phenotypes or features. So it's like
Yeah.
a great question.
Yeah, and it's like it's not just dogs too. Like he was also observing other domesticated animals like cows would develop these spots. Like we think of a cow, we think of the black and white cow,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not how cows look in the wild. Over time, as they were domesticated and farmers kept cows for their milk, they developed these patches. But it's not like the farmer would care, right? Like, why would a farmer
Yeah.
care if their cow looked brown or black or white or who cares? I just want the milk. So
Mm-hmm.
that's that's a weird thing that all these physical changes had appeared kind of spontaneously and were persisting in these domesticated animals.
Amongst like generation, they persist and then they also are then inherited by future generations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it seems to be some sort of like selective advantage that these domesticated animals have, but like for what
Mm-hmm.
purpose? Why?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the other thing that Dmitri noticed was that domesticated animals have a much longer reproductive period than their wild counterparts. So, wolves and wild foxes, for example, have a very specific mating and breeding window, but dogs can pretty much be bred any time of the year. So, that
Yeah.
takes a pretty significant change to the animal's reproductive system. So, why was domestication changing that? Seems kind of random. So,
Mm-hmm.
Dmitri wanted to try an experiment to see if he could domesticate the silver fox and get an answer to some of these questions in real time. But, he had to keep this experiment on the down low. Nobody could know about it. So he contacts a trusted colleague, Nina Sorokina, who was the chief breeder at a commercial fox farm that he collaborated with. Her farm was in a little town called Kohila in Estonia, which was on the other side of the Iron Curtain that separated the eastern and
Uh-huh.
western parts of Europe during the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And Dmitri figured that if the experiment was actually being carried out at her farm, it would be a little bit safer than trying to conduct it literally under the nose of Lysenko and Stalin in the Soviet Union.
That makes
So,
sense.
yeah. Although he was completely transparent with Nina and made sure she was fully aware of what they were doing was like pretty much illegal and that if they got caught, it could end badly for both of them. But,
Yeah.
she was on board
She was on
fully.
board.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So for the actual experiment, they decided that Nina and her workers would slowly approach the fox cages and reach out their gloved hands, and foxes that tried to attack or shrank away in fear would be left alone. But foxes that tolerated the hand coming into the cage would be bred together in hopes that their pups would also show the same kind of acceptance to humans coming near them.
Yeah. Like breeding for temperament.
Yeah, exactly. Breeding for their behavior. And this would be repeated for many generations. And so from the get go, this was already going to be a long term experiment because the foxes breed only once a year. And we know in nature that evolution takes place over thousands of years. So
Mm-hmm.
even if they saw results, Dmitri knew it could take decades and he might not even see results in his lifetime. So it's a long shot.
This is why people do research in C. elegans.
Yes, exactly. It's like within a week you have thousands of them and then each of those can make thousands more the next week. But same with like cell research,
Yeah.
and things like that. Like, oh my God, once a year is just like a ridiculous amount of time and you have to catch them in that window too. You
Yeah.
have to they breed, I think it was like January to February or something is their breeding season. I could be wrong about that, but something like
It's
that.
just like I'm I'm just thinking, like, imagine writing a grant for this experiment and be like, we can really only collect data once a year, but the rest
Yeah.
of the time we need millions of dollars to keep these foxes alive.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine?
No. Which is maybe why it's a good thing he was doing this kind of secretly on the
That's
down
true.
low.
I don't think anyone would fund this.
Yeah, no one's gonna fund this. I just need cooperation from some other
Yeah.
renegade scientists. Also, one quick distinction that I want to make here is that there is a difference between training an animal to obey you and domesticating them.
Yeah.
Because it would be one thing to take like one fox or even many foxes and teach them not to attack or be scared of humans. But actual domestication is something that humans have only been able to achieve with a few animals. We've been able to do it with dogs, cats, horses, pigs, cows, some birds, and even some insects have been domesticated. But some of their closest relatives, like wolves, lions, zebras, have not been able to be domesticated.
People have tried, like, domesticate a zebra.
Yeah, they have actually.
Oh, interesting.
Apparently, for zebras, they have such a strong like prey instinct that if like a lion comes after them, they are conditioned to kick out at the lion or whatever tiger that's trying to attack them, and that instinct to kick is really hard apparently to get over. So I think there was a sign or not a scientist, but some lord or something that was able to train some zebras to pull a carriage, but they've never
Mm-hmm.
actually been domesticated.
Domesticated. Right.
Yeah.
I feel like I've read this about natural prey animals. Like, I know that sometimes, like, rabbits and guinea pigs can be challenging because they are prey animals as opposed to
Mhm.
cats and dogs that are predator animals and they are
Yeah.
less likely to be afraid of humans. I'm not
Yeah.
really sure what that means for cows because I feel like they are also prey animals, but I think because
Yes.
they're so big, like, it's just, like, not, you know, but
Yeah.
it is interesting.
Yeah. It kind of sounds like if you're a prey animal, you have to get over the fear instinct
Yes.
and the instinct to protect yourself. And if you're a predator animal, you have to get over the instinct of attacking everything.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah.
That makes sense.
Um, so Dmitri knew that even though foxes were genetic cousins of dogs and therefore pretty good a candidate for this type of experiment, they may not be able to be domesticated at all, just like wolves, but he still thought it was worth a shot. So Dmitri and Nina started this experiment in 1952, and in 1953, a couple of major things happened. First of all, Watson and Crick, and I really should mention Rosalind Franklin here as well.
Snaps.
Yes. They revealed the double helix model for DNA, and this, of course, was a huge breakthrough. It helped geneticists clearly understand where mutations came from and how they were passed down through generations. Secondly, Joseph Stalin died and was succeeded by Nikita Khrushchev. And Khrushchev was not against Lysenko, but he didn't give him the kind of total support that Stalin had. Khrushchev saw the need to revitalize Soviet science, especially when it started to become clear that Lysenko hadn't actually made any headway in increasing crop yields, whereas the Westerners who were following Mendelian genetics and now had created this new DNA model, they were growing bumper crops every year. So,
There's like clear evidence to support one theory
yeah.
now, and the turn a seed around in your hand 4 times is
Yeah,
turning out to be
it's not
garbage.
working. Shockingly. Yeah, shockingly, it's not working.
But now there's data, so
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So even though Lysenko was still unfortunately held at this position that had a lot of power and respect, Khrushchev was more tolerant to scientists who opposed him. So Dmitri could tell the winds were changing and starting to shift in his favor. And even more exciting, within 3 years, Nina reported that the fox experiment was already starting to yield promising results. They had picked the calmest foxes and bred them together for a few generations, and the new fox litters were already starting to show calmer behaviors towards humans than even the foxes just 2 generations back. And to be clear, they weren't friendly foxes. They were just not aggressive. They were
just not aggro. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good distinction to make, though.
Yeah, they were mostly indifferent to humans and maybe having a little snarl here and there, but it was a huge step forward from the default behavior of biting and running away.
This just sounds like a cat. I think these are just cats.
Yeah, he's a cheap cat level.
I think that he just bred cats at this point.
But yeah, within 2 or 3 years, like, great, you've made foxes into cats. So good. Excellent progress. So Dmitri also now feels brave enough to speak out against Lysenko again and his methods. He starts giving lectures on fox breeding and genetics, and geneticists as a whole are starting to come out in the open more. Okay, here comes a word that I'm not going to be able to pronounce, but in 1957, the Institute of Cytology and Genetics was founded in the city of Akademgorodok. I think I said that right.
I think you did great.
Okay, Akademgorodok. I wish I could do a Russian accent. That would like make me really sound like I knew what I was talking about.
That's a hard accent to fake, though. So
Yeah,
I don't know. So a lot of people could do that if they're not actually Russian.
yeah. I can't even do an Indian accent. I'm Indian, so I'm terrible at that. I'm terrible at it all. So yeah, this city was starting to become like a kind of scientist mecca in Russia. And the founder of the Institute of Cytology and Genetics, Nikolai Dubinin, another Nikolai, tapped on Dmitri to be deputy director and start an evolutionary genetics lab there. So genetics is really starting to make a comeback, and this really irritated Lysenko, as you can imagine. He actually formed a quote unquote committee to go poke around the new institute and interrogate the researchers, and then wrote a report about how the institute's research was going in all the wrong directions and everything was terrible there. And Khrushchev heard of this report, so he decided to visit the institute himself. Khrushchev was apparently a very hot-tempered man, and when he saw that everything at the institute wasn't running perfectly smoothly, because, you know, it's a big institute and it has budget issues and construction projects were running behind schedule. Like a lot of things are happening. It's not all perfectly smooth.
This is just a normal university.
Exactly. It's just like what institute doesn't have problems? But that was enough for Khrushchev to threaten to shut the whole place down. Luckily, he was traveling with his daughter, Rada, who was a biologist and a journalist, and she understood that the work being done at the institute was very important, so she convinced her dad not to shut them down. But since Khrushchev had basically thrown a man tantrum, he still felt like he had to do something. So
this makes sense, right?
Yeah.
He made a fit, so how can he do nothing now?
Yeah, he can't just back down and, be like, okay, I was wrong. It's never wrong.
Because that would be emotionally mature.
Yes.
So,
a trait that we know that all world leaders have, right? Emotional maturity. But yeah, so Khrushchev fired Dubinin, the director of the institute, and made Dmitri director instead.
So he went from getting fired and almost executed to now being promoted.
Yeah.
So, we've really come a long way.
Yeah, it's really good. So this allowed Dmitri to launch a full-scale fox domestication project within Russia. And by this time, Nina's team had bred 8 generations of calm foxes, and they transported about a dozen of them to a fox farm in Lesnoy, Russia. To carry out the actual project, Dmitri hired a young scientist by the name of Ludmila Trut. And Ludmila was very young and very surprised at how nice Dmitri was as a person, because he's this really big director and she's this really young scientist. But he was very caring and very transparent with her about this research. Not only is it borderline illegal, but it was, a very intense project. It would mean long days away from her family. And they possibly would never see results, which could essentially kill her scientific career if it went nowhere. So he just really wanted to make sure she knew what she was getting into, especially as she's so young and just starting out.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really big deal, I feel like, for, a mentor and a really young scientist to just be so forthright about this.
Yeah.
I had a question about Nina and the 8 generations of foxes.
Mm-hmm.
Are they, so she's breeding for calm behavior and temperament. Are they getting more calm by the generation, or is it kind of about the same?
I think it's very slow progress, and that was something that Dmitri and Ludmila would have talked about as well. Like Dmitri would have said, we think we see results. They seem to be calmer, but this could still amount to nothing. So it's still kind of like borderline. Like we think they might be getting calmer, but we're not 100% sure. So
Okay.
we hope so. But
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering how they were measuring it, if it was just how they behaved or if there
yeah,
was maybe some sort of objective measure they were using to calculate calmness, and then if they were selecting for the same traits over and over again, if it was changing over time, which it sounds like it was.
yeah. I think at this point, it is mostly all about the behavior. And even that, it's like very hard to regulate that, right? Because all the caretakers
Definitely.
have to be on board about how fast they approach the foxes and like how fast they stick their hand in there. And do they
Yeah.
try to touch the fox? Do they not? Like, does a snarl constitute as being aggressive or do they have to full on bite
Mm-hmm.
you? Like, what is the threshold there? So I think there's a little bit of a gray area, which is part of the reason why Dmitri was kind of hedging his bets with Ludmilla and saying, like, just want to let you know this may not go anywhere. Um,
Yeah.
but we're trying to be as objective as possible. But like right now, in terms of like physically like measuring a protein or measuring something in their blood or something like that, there's none of that going on. It's really just all behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so Dmitri really wanted to make sure Ludmilla knew what she was getting into, but Ludmilla was fascinated by this work and she was desperate to be a part of it. So, just to be safe, he told her that for now they would still be doing research under the disguise of an animal physiology experiment, just in case Lysenko came up with some more crazy ideas and schemes.
I can't believe this guy's still in the picture.
I know. So, from the first day Ludmilla started working with the foxes from Nina's farm, she immediately noticed how much calmer they were than the rest of the foxes. She kept the experiment going, and in 1963, which is now the 11th generation of foxes, one of the baby foxes named Ember started to wag his tail whenever Ludmilla came close.
Stop. That
Yeah.
is so stinking cute.
Yeah, so very exciting. And it was a very dog like behavior, right?
Yeah.
And that seemed to have arisen spontaneously because where did that come from? None of the other foxes had been wagging their tails. So he was the first one. Ludmilla told Dmitri about it, and he decided that it was time to share his experiment with the world finally after 11 years.
So he's admitting that he's been thinking about this even before it was like, I feel like he's gotten to the point now where these results exist in a time where it's slightly more acceptable for him to be doing this, but he's admitting that he's been thinking about this even when it was
Yeah.
very illegal.
Yeah, definitely. So, for the first time, the Soviet government was allowing a group of geneticists to attend the International Congress of Genetics, and Dmitri gave a talk about the work that he and Ludmilla were doing. And his talk gained a lot of attention, with many scientists remarking on how original and ambitious his work was. And this was also, again, at a time where it was very difficult to share the research between the Soviet Union and the rest of the world due to the Cold War. So Dmitri was like thrilled to have this opportunity to share his work and set up some collaborations with Western scientists.
Yeah.
Yeah, really exciting for him. Okay, you're going to explode from cuteness. So, 2 years later, and two generations of foxes later, the new pups were starting to exhibit even more dog like behaviors. They tried to nuzzle up against their caretakers, licked their hands, would roll on their backs as if asking for belly rubs, and would whine when Ludmilla and the other caretakers tried to leave them.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's very cute. I also feel like the belly exposing is very vulnerable. Like they
it
are
is.
willingly showing their belly to, humans that might hurt them. They don't know.
Yeah, it's a big
Um,
sign of trust. I think even
Big
with
sign of
dogs,
trust.
if they roll over to
Yeah.
show you their belly, it's like, I trust you. I'm surrendering
Yeah.
to you. Like.
Definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, I think my cats do it to be really annoying, and they know that they'll get attention if they do that because we'll give
Yeah.
them belly rubs. So maybe
Nice.
a little different, but
Yeah. A few generations later, more foxes were starting to wag their tails, and a new physical characteristic was starting to appear. Their tails were curling.
so like a C as opposed
Yeah,
to just like a straight line. Okay.
exactly. They were starting to curl up. Yeah. The tame foxes were also keeping their young pup like behaviors, like playing and exploring, well into adulthood. And they started even going for walks on leashes or coming when their name was called.
So cute.
Yeah. So all of these changes had happened in less than a decade since the experiment had started in Lesnoy with Ludmilla.
I mean, yeah, it's like a very short period of time when you think about
Evolutionarily speaking,
cute, like
super short.
super short.
Yeah. And in 1916, a fox with floppy ears was born. Yeah.
This is too cute. This is too cute. Little floppy eared fox with like a little wagging tail. That's just a
Yeah.
puppy. You're
Yeah.
describing a
It
puppy.
is a puppy. They named her Mechta, which translates to dream.
Oh,
And Dmitri started using her pictures in all his presentations, and that made her sort of like a celebrity throughout Russia.
why would you not?
Yeah, like the famous fox with floppy ears. But again, the question is, where are these changes coming from? Ludmilla and Dmitri had not been trying to create foxes with floppy ears or curly tails. They had only been selecting for behavior and not these physical characteristics. So Dmitri had come up with a pretty radical explanation for all of these changes. He realized that the common denominator as to why an animal would retain babyish features or why their reproductive system would start to change was that their hormones were changing. Because hormones are known to regulate everything from stress responses to reproduction to the timing of an animal transitioning from baby to adult. So,
right.
And they found that this was indeed the case. The tame foxes had much lower levels of stress hormones and higher levels of the happiness hormones like serotonin and oxytocin.
Like they're like genetically predisposed to have these different levels, and then you keep selecting for those things.
Well, he did take it a step further than just hormone levels. So he theorized that somehow the levels of these hormones were being controlled by genes. And that was serious out of the box thinking because it meant that these changes were happening without a genetic mutation in like the traditional sense of the word.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. So he's hypothesizing that instead of like a genetic mutation, genes that are already present in the animal were becoming activated or deactivated, which in turn would regulate hormone levels.
That is really impressive because I feel like they discovered gene activity so recently compared to when he's making these leaps.
Oh, yeah. It's like just a couple years after figuring out the structure of DNA, he's proposing this like pretty radical theory.
Which is very sophisticated given that this field of study is like in its very early stages.
Yeah, very, very out of the box. I think like when he first proposed this, people had to sit and have a think about it. They were like, you just blew our minds. What? Like, yeah. So Dmitri hypothesized that this was due to something he called destabilizing selection. So a fox in the wild has a very stable physiology and behavior that is perfectly suited to its environment. But if you suddenly change that environment to one where, for example, it's more advantageous to be tame around humans, the fox's gene activity would change, which would result in its hormone levels changing. And that would result in the physical and behavioral changes that was better suited to this new environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, if you now extrapolate that to the overall question of how did dogs get domesticated from wolves, we could imagine that wolves that were curious about human encampments and got close to them might have gotten some scraps of food and realized that, hey, it's actually advantageous to be around humans because they leave behind food or they actually give us food. And so they naturally slowly started to become less afraid of humans and started developing these like really cute and protective characteristics that endeared them to the humans. And
like make them more appealing.
Yeah. And that was advantageous. It was advantageous if you had a wolf with floppy ears that the humans thought were cute, and then the human would give it more food or something, you know?
It's good to know that even our ancestors, how many ever thousands of years ago, were also just as susceptible
to
cute,
big eyes,
cute, adorable
floppy ears,
behavior.
Adorable. Yes.
So it's not just you and me.
Yeah, it's not. No, definitely not. Yeah, so over tens of thousands of years now we have loving, loyal dogs that used to be wild wolves. And same with cats and same with cows and everything else.
Wow, that's so interesting. I feel like I read something, I don't even remember where, but about how cats and dogs, I guess maybe less dogs, but they get smaller as they're domesticated. Like wild cows are
Oh,
larger in size than
really?
domesticated cows. And like, I mean, for cats, it's definitely true. Like
Yeah.
house cats are just so small relative to, wild cats. But did you find anything about
I
size?
didn't find anything about size, but that would make a lot of sense because, like, maybe you don't need that bulk to fight off predators
Right.
or to have that muscle
Yeah.
mass to catch your prey.
Right.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense actually. The only thing I read about that was like the kind of babyish features that they would retain, but I don't think they were really talking about that in terms of size. They were more talking about that as like young puppies had floppy ears that would eventually stand up straight, but then these floppy ears are now being carried over into adulthood and
Right.
the ears would never stand up straight and things like that. Um, that's really interesting. I would be interested to look more into that because it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so in the following years, Dmitri built a fox farm just 4 miles away from the institute where he and Ludmila could conduct experiments. They hired a bunch of local women from nearby towns to come be caretakers, and soon the foxes and the caretakers were forming emotional bonds with each other.
Of course they were.
Yeah. The women would also help with collecting blood samples and stuff when needed for experiments, and Dmitri would bring visitors to the farm, including visiting scientists, government officials, and even military generals who would all just melt over these really cute, adorable tame foxes.
We've really come such a long way from people being such naysayers and also his brother being literally jailed and executed over doing this type of research. But then all he had to do was bring really cute animals into the mix. And
Yeah.
people were like, do whatever you want, do whatever research you want.
Yeah. Come play with the cute tame foxes. Look. Eventually Ludmila even brought one of the foxes named Pushinka to live with her to see if the fox would form a stronger bond to her specifically rather than just being happy with all humans in general.
Mm-hmm.
The same way a dog is loyal and loves its family more than other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it did. Pushinka trusted Ludmila but was wary of strangers when they came to the house. She would greet Ludmila at the door when she came back from being out. She got jealous if she saw Ludmila give her attention to other foxes. And
Oh, that's so
so
funny.
funny. And one night she even started barking when she heard footsteps outside of Ludmila's house. And it turned out to just be a night guard, but very dog-like, very protective behavior.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dmitri also started setting up more experiments in behavior. Like instead of creating friendly, tame foxes, he started breeding together the most aggressive foxes to create a line of super ferocious foxes.
This is unhinged.
Yeah, I know. It's like, all right, let's go. Let's take this in every direction. Well, he also starts asking questions about nurture versus nature. So, for example, what if they took the embryos from the aggressive mother foxes and implanted them into the tame mother? Would the pups that were born be aggressive, and vice versa? So he's really getting to that question of like how much of this behavior is genetic and how much was taught to them by their mother.
Yeah. What was the answer?
Interestingly, when the aggressive mothers gave birth to tame pups, the tame pups were immediately trying to be friendly with the caretakers, and the aggressive mothers started punishing them for that behavior. Like, what are you doing, you stupid box? You're supposed to hate the humans.
And then did it work?
Yeah, so vice versa, like the pups were behaving like their genetic mothers, showing that this behavior
Okay.
is at least partly genetic. So it's not like just
Yeah, that
learned.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So these experiments were mind-blowing, not only because, as we mentioned, how fast the results were being seen, but also because they finally seemed to be getting answers about how animals could be domesticated, which had been a really big question mark in science for a long time. Dmitri was really excited to share his research, but that was tough because of the Cold War. But since Dmitri was director of the Institute of Cytology and Genetics, he was one of the few Soviet scientists who at least got some leeway to travel internationally to conferences. So he was invited to give
Yeah.
talks at the University of Edinburgh and at UC Berkeley, and scientists were just fascinated by his work. Soon, Dmitri and a bunch of the other Soviet scientists banded together and proposed that the 1978 International Genetics Congress should be held in Moscow, not only to expose scientists in the Soviet Union to the rest of the world, but also to show everyone that Lysenkoism was now officially dead. Like, he has no power anymore.
That took way too long.
It really did.
It took way too long.
It really did. It was just, thank God, finally. Dmitri was very dedicated to not only showing Western scientists how far Soviet science had come, but also he really went out of his way to show foreign scientists that Soviet scientists were not plotting against America and Europe, like much of the Western media claimed. Dmitri and his wife, Svetlana, who was also a biologist, and also with a very Russian name.
This is such a Russian name.
Yes. They would host visiting scientists at their own home, or if they were staying at a hotel, Dmitri made sure they booked the finest rooms at the expense of the institute. They really pulled out all the stops, making sure that they had the best food and entertainment, because he very much believed that war and politics between countries should remain separate from science and the sharing of knowledge.
That makes a lot of sense. It also definitely feels like the political angle here of demonstrating what the Soviet Union is capable of and that they're, reassuring people that they're not actually plotting is, I think, really huge. Like, that messaging is really important.
Yeah.
Of like the signal that sends to the world.
Yeah. And I think especially at an individual level, it would work because scientists like from Europe or from America who would come visit him and play with his foxes were like, you guys, like, calm down, CIA. They're not doing anything. Like, they're playing with foxes. It's fine.
They're playing foxes, yeah.
They're really cute. They're really tame foxes. By 1978, the Institute of Cytology and Genetics had 500 domesticated adult female foxes, 150 domesticated adult males, and 2,000 young foxes that were all showing traits of domestication.
Wow.
Towards the end of his life, Dmitri started to expand his destabilizing selection theory to humans, which I thought this was fascinating. So he wondered if maybe humans were just more domesticated or a tame form of ape. Because after all, we are like over 96% genetically identical to chimpanzees. So at least some of our differences would be the result of changes in gene expression rather than actual DNA mutations.
Yeah, this story took a left turn, but I'm here for it. Yeah, let's go for it.
It just like blew my mind when I read that. I was like, what? But in this case, we would have domesticated ourselves. So our early predecessors who started using tools and standing upright and were forming social bonds would probably naturally mate with others like them.
Mm-hmm.
And although Dmitri could never actually set up an experiment to study of this because of obvious ethical concerns.
Many concerns,
yeah.
But yeah.
It's still a fascinating idea.
It is a fascinating idea. I feel like stuff like that even exists in social science now, that people who are college educated tend to, marry other people who are college educated, or certain value sets sort of beget themselves, like
you look for people who are kind of like you,
similar to you. And things like education, I don't know, just the types of people who, value certain things tend to find each other.
Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense. Like, I can totally see it. In 1985, at the age of 68, Dmitri was hospitalized with severe pneumonia. He never fully recovered, and so he went to see a specialist in Moscow, where he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Dmitri had been a heavy smoker, a habit that he refused to give up, despite his son, who grew up to be a physician, asked him numerous times to give up smoking, but he refused outright. Before his death, he gave one final press interview where he was asked what he wished for mankind in the 21st century. He said, quote, "Be kind and socially responsible, strive for mutual agreement with all people, live in peace, carry a full and sincere responsibility for our younger brothers, all living creatures on Earth. We should never forget that we are just part of nature, and we should live in harmony with nature when we study its laws and use this knowledge to our service."
Wow, what a great question.
Mm-hmm.
And B, what a great answer.
Yeah.
Like, he really covered all his bases there.
Yeah. I was like, that should be emblazoned on like every institute, every university ever. Don't forget that we are also part of nature.
It's like social responsibility, caring for each other. Yeah, that's a great answer. I like that.
Dmitri died on November 14th, 1985, surrounded by his friends and family. Tons of people showed up to his funeral, including staff and scientists from the Institute of Cytology and Genetics and many of his World War II comrades. In 2017, a statue depicting Dmitri and one of his tame foxes was built near the Institute of Cytology and Genetics to honor his 100th birthday.
Very sweet.
And Ludmila Trut took over the fox domestication project and keeps it running to this day and is still working on uncovering more of the genetic secrets behind animal domestication. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. I do love that the fox made it into the statue with him because that's very appropriate,
Yes.
but I find that very endearing.
Yes, it's a really cute statue. I'll put a picture of it on the website. It's like he's sitting on a bench and he's like reaching out to this fox who's looking at him. It's really cute.
That's really cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like really crazy that this experiment is still going. I feel like there's so few like this that are not, population-based human studies that are still going on for such a long time. So I just find that so impressive. I feel like there's so many barriers like funding and staffing and institutional access. And I'm very impressed by the fact that they have kept this going to answer all these cool questions.
Yeah, I think even after he died, it was still a bit of a struggle to keep it going. But,
it makes sense.
Ludmila was just like, no, this experiment is too valuable. We cannot just scrap it now. We have to keep it going. And she worked really hard to, make sure that it didn't fail because of budget issues or something. Like, she was like, no, this is too important. So, yeah.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a story I really enjoyed researching this one for obvious reasons.
Yeah. No, that was a great story. It was so interesting and really different from stuff we've talked about before. Like, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for such a great story.
Yes, and thank you for listening. And also, I just want to mention that we will be taking a break for 2 episodes. So we will be back with you all in June after Arpita gets married.
Yes, just a little life break.
Yes.
And then we will be right back with lots of fun episodes. And we can't wait to reconnect with all of our listeners in just a few short weeks. Thanks for listening. If you have a suggestion for a story we should cover or thoughts you want to share about an episode, reach out to us at smartteapodcast.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at smartteapodcast and listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a rating or comment. It really helps us grow. New episodes are released every other Wednesday. See you next time.